Chandra, I think you can start introducing Abhishek.
Welcome to the IG Idea seminar series. It's my pleasure to invite Abhishek Singh, who's professor at IIPS Mumbai. He works on mortality analysis, health inequities, maternal child health. He's involved with the National Family Health Survey. He's going to talk today about sex ratio at birth in India. It's an empirical paper. He's extensively published in many international journals of repute, including Studies in Family Planning, Social Indicators Research, Social Science Medicine, Asian Population Studies. So thank you very much, Abhishek, for accepting our invitation, and we look forward to an interesting talk. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Chandrasekhar, for introducing me to the audience. It gives me immense pleasure to connect with you today and to share my thoughts on the topic related to sex ratio at birth in India. Although I have visited IGIDR a couple of times, but I think this is the first opportunity that I am going to interact with you all through this webinar. And I'm really grateful to Professor Srijit Mishra, Professor Chandrasekhar, the Professor Mahendra Dev, Director of IGIDR, for giving me this great opportunity to interact with you on this important topic. I think when Professor Mishra invited me for this talk in the IGIDR webinar series, I started wondering what should I speak during this webinar. So I started looking for potential topics, which out of which I can select one, and I was interested to find a topic which is relevant and important for the community of social scientists like us. At the same time, I wanted to have a topic which can motivate the young scholars, researchers to carry out high quality research on topics that are very closely connected to us, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. So after a lot of thinking, I decided to speak on a topic which Professor Chandrasekhar just now mentioned, because I thought this topic is very, very important and relevant for Indian social scientists and our society, Indian society at large. And this is a challenge which India has been facing for a very long time. But if you look at the research on this topic, that is very limited. Particularly the empirical research, Professor Mishra just now said that what I'm going to speak today is an empirical research on sex ratio at birth. And there is very limited research on this topic, despite the fact that this is a challenge that India has been facing for many, many years. And at the same time, this topic is also very sensitive and also challenging to address, because this connects with each one of us as a human being. With some of us, it may be directly connected, and with others, it is indirectly connected because we live in a society where we see such things happening. People desiring sons over daughters, people using technology to avoid female births, and so on. So my today's talk is based on a research paper which we have recently published in Studies in Family Planning. I have shared a copy of this paper with the webinar organizers so that if you are interested, you can read the full paper. So give me a minute so that I can share my screen, and then I'll go into the presentation, straight into my presentation. Lingaraji, can you please check? Because I'm not getting Windows.
You're having some problem, Abhishek?
Yes, I think the window is not visible
Try.
now. Yeah, I'm trying, but I'm not able to get the window. Yeah,
Nigaraj,
Yeah, yeah,
can you?
I'm in the just a share screen. Yeah,
yeah.
share screen. Then you will after clicking that share
Yes,
button,
yes,
then
it
it will
has
give
come.
the windows.
It has come. It has come. Thank you,
Yeah,
Lingaraji.
yeah.
Is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. So
Request you to
today,
please make it full
yeah.
screen.
Oh yes, yes, yes. So I'm going to talk on this topic, which is sex ratio at birth in India. And this is a presentation that I am going to make on behalf of my project team, Gender Project team. Gender Project was instituted in IIPS in the year 2017 to understand gender equity and other demographic issues related to gender in India. And this project is a collaborative project between the International Institute for Population Sciences, Mumbai, and the University of California, San Diego. And the funding for this project came from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through grant number OPP 1179208. So I'm making this presentation on behalf of this large team of contributors, which includes myself, Dr. Kaushalind Kumar, Dr. Ajit Kumar Yadav, Professor James, Dr. Lotus McDougall, Dr. Yamini Vilas, and Professor Anita Raj. So Dr. Lotus McDougall and Dr. Anita Raj are from the University of California at San Diego. And this is the project website where all the outputs of the project are available for anyone to view. So we have put around 17 research papers, some 7 research briefs, a few infographics, and some media articles. So if you are interested to look at the other outputs of the gender project, please feel free to visit our website, and you will have access to all the outputs related to this project. So as I have already mentioned to you that my today's talk is based on a paper that we have recently published in Studies in Family Planning. And the title of the paper was Factors Influencing the Sex Ratio at Birth, a new analysis based on births occurring between 2005 and 16. And I have just added an altmetric score for this article, which says that this article is in top 5% of all research outputs ever tracked by altmetric. So this is a research which is getting a lot of attention in the media, and particularly because of its connection with each one of us. As long as we are living in a society, this topic is going to touch us in some way or the other. So now I'll give you a brief background before showing you some very interesting results. So you all know that concerns regarding sex ratio imbalance among children aged 0 to 6 years in India is decades old. It is not a new thing which I am going to speak, but I will show you some results which will definitely be quite new and that will fascinate you about what is happening in the Indian society in the recent time. Now, although this issue is there in the Indian society for long, but this discussion acquired prominence during the early 1990s when the Nobel laureates Mr. Amartya Sen came out with an article on more than 100 million women missing, which highlighted the issue of sex selective abortions and the preference for sons across Asia and India in particular. And after that, you may see a lot of papers which talk about female deficit, or they talk about child sex ratio, how that has changed over the time, how it is in favor of males compared to females, and so on. There are other scientific literature also coming from India, China, Vietnam, Korea, which says that India and China account for most of the world's female deficit, and that the sex ratio of children aged 0 to 6 years in India has long been in favor of males. And if I give you the under normal circumstance, the value of sex ratio at birth under normal circumstance, it lies between 103 and 106, and the global average is somewhere at 105. Now let me give you some picture related to child sex ratio in India. Now according to the 2011 census, the child sex ratio was 109 males per 100 females. So you can imagine that this number is far away from the normal average that we see in populations which are not marked by son preference. Now, what is more worrying is the fact that CSR, child sex ratio, has been increasing over the last 3 decades. Now, if I take data from the 2001 census, 1991 census, and 2011 census, you can see that the child sex ratio has increased from 106 in 1991 to 108 in 2001, and then to 109 in 2011. So we can see that there is a consistent increase in the sex ratio of the child population over the last 3 censuses. Now the next census was supposed to be done in this year, but due to COVID-19 situation, the census has been postponed. We are not sure when that data is going to come. So this is what we know from the past 3 censuses. But there is one more data set which we can use to know the recent value of child sex ratio in the Indian population. And if we look at that data, then we get a higher value compared to what we got in 2011 census. So this is particularly worrying. First of all, the child sex ratio is out of the normal limits, biological limit, and then it is also rising. Now, what determines child sex ratio? So there are 2 key demographic components that determine child sex ratio. The first one is high sex ratio at birth, and the second one is excess female mortality during the early years of life. There is also a third component, which is under enumeration of female births compared to male births in the Indian censuses. But over the time, the quality of census data is improving, and there are indications that the third factor may not be very relevant in the recent time. So I'm going to talk more about these 2 factors. Now let me first talk about the second factor, excess female mortality during the early years of life. This was more common 20 years back when we used to see higher infant mortality among females compared to males, higher under 5 mortality among female children compared to male children. But if you look at the trends in the recent times, the sex differentials in mortality are narrowing. And there are indications that in certain states and certain populations, these differences have narrowed down. Particularly if you look at the NFHS 4 data, which is publicly available, you will find that the differences has completely narrowed down. Now, if there are only 2 components that determine child sex ratio, and the one component, the differences are narrowing down, still the child sex ratio is increasing, what could be the reason? So the only thing which is possible in this scenario is that the SRB is increasing. Sex ratio at birth is increasing over time. Otherwise, the under enumeration, we have no evidence to say that that is really important in the current time. The gap between female and male mortality has reduced or has disappeared, then what remains? It is the sex ratio at birth. And that is the reason why I'm focusing on sex ratio at birth in today's talk. Because whenever we talk about these issues, we talk more about sex ratio of child population, that is 0 to 6 population. And we look at all interventions from that perspective, that is how to correct the imbalanced child sex ratio. Now, we did a quick literature as to what is available on this topic, and we came across an interesting thing that most of the studies that we found, although they were limited in number, very limited in number, but they were based on census data, macro analysis of census data. Now you all know that censuses are done at regular intervals of 10 years or more. In our situation, in Indian situation, the censuses are done every 10 years. So if somebody is interested to look at trends and patterns of sex ratio at birth, probably census data is not of great help. Like in our case, I looked at the child sex ratio in 1991, then 2001 and 2011, but I have no idea as to what is happening after 2011. The other problem with the census data is that census contains limited information. So if somebody wants to look at what factors, socioeconomic, demographic, or kinship structure related factors or residence related factors are associated with SRB, then there are serious limitations because the census will give you only limited information. So all the studies that we screened across had those issues. And there were only few studies that actually examined the associations of socioeconomic and residence related factors with SRB. But those that exist showed some significant associations, and interestingly, most of the time these findings were mixed. For example, if one study said that education, female education was associated with child sex ratio at birth, the other study said no, it is not associated. So many a times these findings were mixed and we were not able to actually conclude that which are the factors which are really associated with the sex ratio at birth. And a very important missing link in the research was variations in SRB by birth order. Now, some small scale studies in India and abroad show that SRB gets more imbalanced with increase in birth order, because only a few couples would like to sex select at first birth. That is, we would not like to care whether we are going to have a male child or a female child when we are likely to have the first one. But once it is a male child or a female child, and if the person has a preference for male child, then the subsequent behavior is altered. And that's why these small scale studies, regional studies, have found some evidence to say that the SRB varies by birth order, but there is no national level study which can really throw light on this relationship in the recent time. And this is particularly very, very important in societies that are affected by son preference, as in the case in India. So what we aim to do in this research, we aim to examine the factors associated with the SRB in India using data from the most recent NFHS, for which micro data is available. This was conducted in the year 2015-16, which we will now refer to as NFHS 4. Some of you have also seen the fact sheets of NFHS 5 data, but the micro data is not available in the public domain for researchers like you and me to analyze. So this research is based on this NFHS 4 data, for which the micro data is available in public domain. Now, one more point that I would like to mention here is that we stratify our analysis by birth order, an approach that can inform any changes in patterns of sex selection for sons by birth order in the recent past. So this is what I am going to do in my subsequent slides. Now let me briefly give you some idea about the data and the methods that we use for conducting this research. So our research is based on over 553,000 births that occurred between 2005 and 2016 in households interviewed in NFHS 4. So you can see that we are dealing with a very large sample size, and this sample size matters, and at the end of my talk I will show you why it is important to have this analysis on such a large sample size. I'll give you a small show you a slide on this subject at the end of my talk. NFHS 4, for those of you who are not very familiar with it, is a nationally representative household survey which was conducted across 29 states and 6 union territories of India. And NFHS 4 in total interviewed over 600,000 households, from which over 699,000 women in the age group 15 to 49 were interviewed, representing all the 640 districts across India. NFHS, the key objectives of NFHS 4 are to provide state and district level estimates of fertility, mortality, family planning, maternal and child health indicators, and other related factors like domestic violence, sexual behavior, other health issues, HIV/AIDS, and there are other components like malaria estimation, prevention of malaria, screening for certain cancers like cervical cancer and so on. The NFHS also implements a roster for collecting information on all births that occurred to women who were interviewed in the survey. And using this roster, we got access to these over 553,000 births which happened between 2005 and 16. We could have increased this sample size to a bigger number by going back in time, but there are certain studies and evidence which shows that the more we go back in time, the more kinds of biases enter into the data. And one important bias that I should mention here is that any analysis based on births which are very distant in the past are more masculine in nature for many reasons. I'll not cover those reasons due to lack of time here, but evidence shows that. So that's why we thought, okay, let us restrict the analysis to births that happened between 2005 and 16. And this also provided us an opportunity to come to see what has happened between NFHS 3 and NFHS 4. It is just to tell you that NFHS 3 was conducted in India in 2005 and 6. So what I'm going to show you is something which is after NFHS 3. And in this survey in NFHS 4, the women's response rate was over 97%. Now then there are various approaches to analyze sex ratio at birth. As I have told in the beginning, that one of the most common approaches is to do macro analysis of census data. but that has got certain limitations, which I had mentioned to you earlier, that censuses are done at regular intervals, which are sometimes too large to examine trends. And also census is limited in information. So if you are really interested to look at the associations of socioeconomic, demographic, and residence related variables or kinship structure related variables, then census is not the best vehicle or source to do. On the other hand, the household survey data are rich in information. You will get a lot of information related to socioeconomic, demographic, residence related, and kinship structure. But at the same time, they have problems related to small sample sizes, and then they lack statistical power. So given these pros and cons of both the sources, and given that we got over 551,000 births, we thought it is a better idea to look at the household survey data for examining the associations between different factors and SRB. So one of the most useful approach while using household survey data is to model the probability of male birth. And to model the probability of male birth, we estimated multivariable logistic regressions, and we adjusted for selected socioeconomic and demographic, residence related, and kinship structure related factors in the multivariable logistic regressions. I'll show you some of these factors in the subsequent slides. Now, another important point while analyzing survey data is to use appropriate sampling weights. Now, you may be aware that NFHS4 used a very complex survey design in both urban and rural areas. So NFHS4 adopted a two-stage design where villages or census enumeration blocks were selected in the first stage using probability proportional to size scheme, and then a fixed number of households were selected from selected villages or census enumeration blocks in the second stage using systematic sampling. And there were some non-responses too. So there is always a need to use sampling weights to account for the complex survey design. Another important point is to also adjust your estimates for these complex designs by using some novel methods. If you are a good user of Stata, you may be knowing that you can use survey commands, which we represent with SVY. So those should be used to account for the complex survey design of NFHS4, and these were adopted in the current analysis. And we present the sex ratios at birth as males per 100 female births. Although if you look at Indian literature, the sex ratio is conventionally presented as number of females per 1,000 males. But to make comparisons with international data and in other studies, we present sex ratio at birth as male births per 100 female births. Now let me quickly show you trends in sex ratio at birth in India and selected states for the period 2005 to 15, and this is based on the sample registration system. And you can see that there are only two states, one from the south, which is Kerala, and the other one is from the central part of India, Chhattisgarh, where the sex ratio is in the normal biological limit. But for all other states, the sex ratio at birth is outside the normal limit. And there are certain states like Rajasthan, Haryana, where the sex ratios are much far away from the normal biological limit. Now, if you look at the district level, you can again find clustering of high SRB districts in both 2001 and 2011 census, but the only difference that you can see between the two censuses is there is a shift in the clustering. So that in 2001, the high SRB districts are more spatially distributed compared to 2001, but you can see red spots at which prominent red spots. Now let me briefly give you the distribution of these births by certain characteristics like caste, wealth index, average fertility at the PSU level. By PSU I mean it is village in the rural area and census enumeration block in the urban area. And in sampling theory, PSU, the full form of PSU is primary sampling unit. And the fifth variable that I show you here is mother's schooling. So this chart just gives you a distribution of births based on which we are doing our analysis that I'm going to share with you. So let us look at the sex ratio at birth from our analysis. It was around 109 males per 100 females. And there are considerable differences by urban and rural areas. In urban areas, it was 111, and in rural area, it was 109. So you can see that at the national level, the SRB is outside the normal limit. And if I compare this with the sample registration system data, so for this period, that is between 2005 and 15, the sex ratio at birth was 110.7. And if I look at the Indian census, it was 111.2. So the results or the SRB that I get from my data is fairly close to what we get from the sample registration system and from the census of India, and which gives us a lot of confidence that we can do subsequent analysis and look at how sex ratio at birth varies by other socioeconomic, demographic, and residence related characteristics. Now have a look at mother's schooling. So you can see that there is an increase in the value of sex ratio at birth as we move from no schooling to higher schooling. So the women or mothers who have higher schooling, that is higher than secondary, the SRB was 111. And we are also providing you 95% confidence intervals. So this value lies between 109 to 130. Women who have secondary level of education, for them also the SRB is very high, around 111. So we can see some trend that as the women's schooling increases, the SRB is also increasing. Now, what is happening to wealth index? We again get the same picture. If you look at the poorest 20%, the bottom 20% people, the sex ratio at birth is 105.8, and if you look at the 95% CI, it is well within the normal limit. And now you go to the richest one, you can see the deviation from 105 to it goes to 116. Now what about social groups and why we are interested in social groups? Now if you look at sociological literature, that suggests that upper caste households are more patriarchal compared to the scheduled caste or tribe. There is a lot of sociological evidence that women have higher bargaining, women from SC, ST and OBC groups have higher bargaining power compared to women from the other caste groups. Similarly, there is suggestion that this may still continue today. Because still, if you look at the labor force participation and others, you may find that lower caste women earn a significant proportion of family income compared to the upper caste women. And there are other factors as well. So we were also curious to see how the SRB varies by social groups. And our data is very consistent with the sociological literature. Now, if I look at scheduled caste group, then the sex ratio is very, very normal, I would say. But as we move from scheduled caste to scheduled tribes to scheduled caste, the sex ratio at birth is outside the normal limit. And as I go to others who are neither SC, ST, nor OBC, then the values are like 111.4. So we see a clear pattern, clear increase in the sex ratio at birth as we move on the social ladder of Indian society. Now, another variable in which we were interested was land holding. Now, again, I would refer to the literature that comes particularly from Southeast Asia that has identified land holding size of households as a proxy of patriarchal customs and norms. The scholars have argued that land is the most valuable economic resource through which men continue to determine power dynamics within genders, even in the modern age. And we all know that India is primarily an agrarian society, and land ownership is a very important right, property right. Scholars, if you look at more literature from China, coming from China, from Vietnam, and from Korea, then there is also evidence that SRB in mothers who are engaged in land-based occupations is fairly high compared to mothers who were engaged in other occupations. So taking a clue from there, we thought, why don't we look at the relationship between SRB and the land holding size. So NFHS 4 provided us with some information on land holding, and here is the data on this slide. So if we look at the households that had up to 10 acres of land, among them the SRB was 109.6, and among those who had more than 10 acres of land, the SRB was around 112. So there is an increase with the ownership of land, the size, land holding size of the household. Now, another important demographic variable which might affect the preference for sons in the is the surviving male sibling. And I told you in the beginning that there is evidence which suggests that if the first birth is a male or a female, that decides about the sex of the second child. And here the picture is very clear that all those couples who had a surviving male child, among them the SRP was within the normal limit. But those couples who had a daughter as the first child, among them the sex ratio at birth is far from the normal biological limit. Now, in NFHS, we have also asked questions regarding ideal number of children that a couple would like to have. And then we ask, once the couple tells us what is the ideal number of children, then we ask how many of these should be sons and how many of these should be daughter. So I'm making the use of that information to derive this figure that is there on your screen. So all those couples who said that their ideal number of sons is equal to the ideal number of daughters or less than the ideal number of daughters, among those the sex ratio at birth is fair, is balanced and within the normal limit. But those who say that for them the ideal number of sons is more than the ideal number of daughters, among them the sex ratio at birth is very, very distorted, and the value comes out to be 130 male births per 100 female births. Now, according to birth order, again we can see there is increase in the sex ratio at birth from birth order 1 to birth order 3rd, and then we see a slight drop at 4th or higher order births. So remember that these are bivariate results, and I'll also show you the results after adjusting for the socioeconomic and demographic characteristics, what happens when we adjust for other factors. Now, the other important factor that is related to sex ratio at birth is the fertility, average fertility of women at the PSU level. That what is the fertility norm? So look at the distribution. Again, you will see that as fertility declines, the sex ratio at birth gets more distorted. Now, if there is a PSU where the average number of children per woman is more than 2.8 children, then the sex ratio at birth is under 3.7. But if we go to a community where the average number of children per woman is less than or equal to 1.5, then the sex ratio at birth becomes 112. So there is a consistent increase with decline in fertility, community fertility. Now, what about state regions? Many people think that it is only the central region or the north region which has sex ratio at birth which is distorted. Obviously, that is true. In the north region, you can see the highest sex ratio at birth. North region comprises of Jammu Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Haryana, Punjab, Delhi, and Rajasthan. Then central region has also high sex ratio at birth, and central region comprises of states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Madhya Pradesh. But look at the west region, which comprises of Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Goa. The sex ratio at birth is even higher than what you see in the central region. Now, most striking finding comes from the south region. We always think that there is no sun preference in southern region, or there are only few districts where the sex preference is there. But if we collectively look at the south region also, the sex ratio at birth is above the normal biological limit, although the value is relatively lower compared to the north region and the west region. Now, another important variable while studying sex ratio at birth is the ultrasound use of technology. And we have some data, although I'm not going to explore this issue in much more detail because this is more complicated and sensitive. But just raw numbers suggest that those women who have undergone ultrasound for their most recent birth had very high sex ratios at birth compared to those who had not undergone ultrasound. And the sex ratio at birth among the women who had not undergone ultrasound in their most recent birth had a sex ratio which is in the normal limit. Now let me show you some adjusted results. So in the beginning I said that at birth order 1 there will be only a select group of women or couples who would actually sex select, or who would actually think of doing sex selection. And those that thing is very clear if you look at these probability of a male birth by birth order. Now, by mother's schooling, if we look at birth order 1 and birth order 2, mother's schooling is not associated with the probability of a male birth. Net of all other factors, all other socioeconomic, demographic, residence related, and kinship structure related factors. Now, but when we go to the birth order 3 or higher, we see that women who are educated up to primary or higher, up to secondary or higher, they have a higher propensity to have a male birth compared to a female birth. Now, when we look at this picture by the wealth quintiles, we find that at birth order 1, wealth does matter. Those who are in the middle group and the richest group, they had a higher propensity of having a male birth compared to a female birth. But as we go to the birth order 3 or higher, then we see that all women who belong to middle quintile or richer or richest quintile, they had a very high propensity to have a male birth. So what virtually we are seeing is that there are few variables that are associated with SRP at birth order 1, and most of the factors are visible only at birth order 3 or higher. We couldn't go to birth order 4 because of the reduction in sample size. The sample size reduced like anything, so we thought maybe it's better to club that with birth order 3. Now, when we look at land holding size of household, again we see that at birth order 1, the land holding size does not matter much. But as we move to birth order 2 and birth order 3, you can see that the households that had more than 10 acres of land had a higher propensity of having a male birth compared to those couples or households which did not have a land. Now, if we look at surviving male sibling, again the picture is very similar to what we saw in the bivariate, that those who don't have a male child are more likely to have a male birth at the second birth and for birth order 3 or higher. Now, birth order, the difference between ideal number of sons and daughters, the picture is very clear. Due to lack of time, I'm just moving now quite fast, but the picture is very clear that those who have higher ideal number of sons than daughters as their ideal, they are more likely to have a male birth compared to a female birth. Now, this picture is again similar when we look at the average number of children per woman at the PSU level, but this variable is also associated with probability of male birth at birth order 1. So we see only 3 variables that are associated with probability of male birth at birth order 1, but a majority of the variables that we have seen till now were associated with the probability of male birth at birth order 3 or higher, which makes a case that we should definitely do stratified analysis by birth order, because we will be in a better position to understand the trends and patterns of the SRP in a better way if we stratify our analysis by birth order. Now, to conclude, The SRB at birth order 1 is above the normal upper limit for the country as a whole, as we have seen, and across the national regions, like we have seen east, west, north, south. We can also do this analysis at the state level, but again, the main issue is that of sample size, that at the state level, the sample size might reduce, and then some other biases are likely to come. And another interesting finding which came out from this analysis is that the SRB increases with higher birth order. Now, another important finding of our study is that sex selection is spreading to areas not previously known for sex selection as the South India. If you look at earlier studies, older studies, they will say that there is no sex selection in South India, there is limited sun preference, but this data clearly shows that the sun preference is percolating also into the south, and there are indications that the SRB in the south also is going out of the normal limit, and this is also confirmed from the census data. If you look at the census 2011 data, you'll again find a similar kind of picture. Now, the third point, which is very, very important, and I would like to highlight here, is that India is going through fertility transition where the fertility is declining. South Indian states have already achieved the replacement level fertility. By that I mean fertility level which is below 2.1 children per woman, and the rest of the states are experiencing fertility decline at a very faster rate. So given these results, the fertility decline may further distort the SRB in favor of males. So that also we may see if the sun preference combines with sex selection technology, then this may happen. Now, as I have already said, most SRB correlates were visible at birth orders 3 or higher. We also got some evidence for the landholding patriarchy hypothesis, where we found that households owning more than 10 acres of land were more likely than households owning any land, not owning any land, to have a male birth. And there is one more study from rural India which actually suggests this, that the child sex ratio, in that study, the child sex ratio was much higher among those households who owned 10 or more acres of land compared to the households which did not own a land. And our results are also consistent with the sociological literature, which says that patriarchal norms are more strongly held among the other castes compared to scheduled castes or tribes. Similarly, among Muslims compared to Hindus. And I will just quickly show you results from one of my other research that we have recently published in Social Indicators Research, which also confirms this finding. We have quantitatively tried to rank the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, other backward caste, others, similarly religion and land holding on an index of patriarchy, and a higher value index value says that patriarchy is more relative to a lower value, and you can see that the level of patriarchy among others is much higher compared to scheduled tribes or caste. Similarly, Muslims are less likely to have patriarchal norms compared to Hindus, and then the patriarchal norms increase consistently with increase in land holding size. So this is just to say that these results, the SRB results, and are very closely matching with what we did very recently. And if you are interested, this paper is also open access, so you can just download it from the web and read the full paper. So the final slide from my side, I said in the beginning that I'll speak on the sample size issue, that why we were particularly concerned about sample size, and why that 5,51,000 gave us an edge over the other analysis. SRB is highly affected by sample size. And so any analysis of SRB is estimated from survey data should be interpreted with caution. I have given a small table here. So if the analysis is based on 1,000 births and the sex ratio is 107, then you can see the lower limit and the upper limit. It's very wide. It ranges from 94 to 121. But as we move to 5,000 births, it narrows down. And as we move to 100,000 births, you can see the limit. It's very, very narrow. So one has to be very careful when you are analyzing data from a household survey, particularly on SRB. So the confidence intervals are likely to be even wider. Now this result which I am showing in the table does not account for complex survey designs. This is based on a simple random sampling design, that if you have collected data using a simple random sampling, then these will be the 95% CIs. Now think about the data like NFHS or IHDS or other data sets which use complex multi-stage designs. These CIs are likely to be even wider. So this is just a caution for all those who are interested in analyzing issues like sex ratio at birth or child sex ratio using census data. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on sex ratio at birth. Thank you so much.
Sir, we have few questions from our attendees.
Yep.
The one which is showing on the screen from Mr. Ramakant Patra.
Yep.
Chandra, can you see this screen? This is Ramakanta has these two questions. I was trying to see whether to get him onto the board. He has first a question, why the sex ratio mismatch is a problem. Sorry, I'm a novice. And then he is having a second thing, is it sociologically true that higher castes are richer on average and the preference for male? Why not the same in poorer families? We might need more income from male labor, surgical interference.
Surgical interference.
Thank you. I'm trying to see whether I can get Ramakanta into the thing. Meanwhile, there are interference. If you can explain what he means. Yeah, Ramakanta is there. Ramakanta, can you ask your questions because if you can explain what he means. Yeah, Ramakanta is there. Ramakanta, can you ask your questions because
Yes, sorry. It is not my research area. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Yes, sorry. It is not my research area. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Mr. Ramakant, I request you to please mute your screen.
It is not my research area.
Speaker.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Mr. Ramakant, I request you.
Can I say now? Maybe.
Yes. Please go ahead. Only your background voice was coming, Ramakanta. So please go ahead.
Okay. So the difference in sex ratio.
Please
So
go
the
ahead.
difference in the.
Your background voice was coming, Ramakanta. So please go ahead.
So the difference in the so the mismatch in sex ratio, why is that a problem? I wanted to ask because there will be other variables coupled with the mismatch that would actually create an economic problem. Why this mismatch itself is a problem? Coupled with the mismatch that would actually create an economic problem. Why this mismatch itself is a problem?
Mr. Patra, can you explain what you mean by mismatch? Because then I will be in a better position to understand what you are referring to. Mr. Patra, can you explain what you mean by mismatch? Because then I will be in a better position to understand what you are referring to.
The 100 women to 109 men. Why this mismatch would be a problem?
You see, they.
109 men. Why this mismatch would be a problem?
See, Mr. Patra, if you look at the populations that do not have any practice of sex selection, in those populations, we see that there are around 105 male births per 100 female births. Now, biologically, if you go into the biology, you will find that female births are biologically much stronger compared to the male births. So even if some more male births happen compared to female births, over time, the number of male and female births get balanced because of this biological strength that the women have. But as you move from that normal value to high values like 109, 110, then that balance is less likely to happen. And the result of that is will be a distorted child sex ratio population. Then over a long time, you will see distortion in the sex ratio of overall population. Now, this can have a lot of implications. One of the most important implication that could come up is like marriage squeeze. What will happen to marriage if you have in your population only boys and few girls? What will happen? Will the boys will get brides for marriage? So there are many sociological problems that might come up if the number of male births goes beyond that biological limit of 10 between 103 to 106 and the global average being 105. And in many societies, if you might be reading definitely sociological literature where you may see that these problems have started coming in Punjab and Haryana, where you know adult males are getting wives from other states. They are bringing wives from poorer states like Bihar, West Bengal, and so on. So this problem is likely to intensify if the number of male births cross a particular limit. So there are n number of issues that are associated with it. So definitely there is a need to check this growth in sex ratio at birth. And government, you might have also seen that government of India has made a lot of policies. Now they are having coming up with programs like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, and so on, to just have a control on this rising sex ratio at birth.
There is a second question you may be able to see. Is there in a relationship sex ratio with migration? Because in Kerala, overall sex ratio is high. So you want to comment on that?
I,
This is
I would say that migration has nothing to do with sex ratio at birth. Sex ratio of population might definitely get affected because of migration, and Kerala is a classic example where women, lot of women migrate to Gulf countries and even in the other parts of the country for nursing job and other type of work. So that can affect the sex ratio of the overall population. But as far as the sex ratio at birth is concerned, I don't think migration has any direct link.
so there is another question from Yadavindu Ajit. Have the birth order results already taken into account the presence of existing child gender in the family? Also, does the birth order include the case of abortion of child mortality cases?
Yeah. So when I showed you the bivariate results, when I showed you the sex ratio at birth by birth order, then in that we have not controlled for the gender of the previous child. For first birth order, there is nothing like sex of the previous child because there is no other child. For subsequent also, we have not looked at what was the sex of the previous child. But in case of birth order 2 and birth order 3 are higher in the multivariate setup, we definitely controlled for the sex of the previous child, whether they have got at least a son. A surviving male sibling was controlled. So despite that, we see the results that I shared with you. And about abortion, no, in this analysis, abortions are not taken care of because of two reasons. One is that in NFHS, we asked whether somebody has undergone any abortion. We ask about spontaneous as well as this abortion, but our experience is that they are highly underreported. So even if there is an abortion, that will be that is less likely to be reported. The other opportunity is that you can look at these abortions using the reproductive calendar data, which is available in NFHS, but that reproductive calendar data is restricted to last 5 years. So you will not be able to go back. Like in our analysis is based on births that took place between 2005 to 15. So because of these compulsions, abortion was also not included in this analysis. That whether there is an abortion, what happens to the SRB of those women who have undergone abortion. But if you are interested to look at SRB among the most recent births, that is births in the last 5 years, then you can definitely include abortion in your analysis. Yes, Surbi, I think you have asked again a very interesting question, and definitely these things are related with access to technology. I will say it's not only related to access to technology, but access to knowledge. Now, if you look at richer people, somebody has asked earlier also, rich people, they also have knowledge of these technologies and they can also access it. They can afford the cost. But the poorer people, despite the fact that they may want more, they may not have the knowledge, they may not have the courage, and they may not also have the money to access it. The same thing can happen with the upper caste people also, that they have better knowledge, they have better access to technology. But the other point which I would also like to mention is that it has also something to do with the status of women. And if you look at literature, sociological literature, and even in the economic literature, you will see that, you know, participation in labor force or workforce can also provide you some, status in the household. Earning member may have a higher status compared to non-earning member, and historically if you look at, the women of lower castes were more likely to work outside home compared to the upper caste women. So there could be many things, sociological issues as well as access, knowledge, you know access to money, affordability, all these together actually decide how one behaves. So there could be many things. It's not just an better economy or something like that. Thank you, Survi, for your question.
Okay, if there are no more questions, thank you very much, Abhishek, for the very interesting seminar and the very careful data work that you have actually done. And I'm sure our students really benefited from the insights that you shared based on your paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrasekhar, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you, Dr. Mishra, and all others at IGIDR, faculty members, students, for patiently listening to the talk. And I will be very happy to answer any questions that you may have later on, or if you need any help in understanding sex ratios, understanding patriarchy, or any other associated issue related to demography and gender particularly. Thank you, Dr. Chandrasekhar. Thank you, Dr. Mishra.
That's really nice of you, Dr. Abhishek and dear Chandra, for sharing it. And yeah, this was the first time we were trying to go live on a seminar. And perhaps we will need your feedback after the seminar and others. And thank everybody, particularly the technical team behind. There was who handled it quite well. So we had a small streaming problem about your presentation, but I think Sally did manage it well when you could not present it from your side. So I thank all of you for this. So we look forward to more active interactions between IIPS and IGIDR, and we look forward to taking that forward.
Sure, Dr. Mishra. I will put this word to Professor James, and we also have a team which organizes these seminars. So we will be in touch together, and it will be a good idea to collaborate also on some of these research, so that we all of us can benefit from our collective knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Manish.